What's up, everyone? So I promised that I was going to make a video on some tips if you're thinking about going big turbo. Now, let me start by saying, I know I made the modification video and I made a couple dyno videos and things of that nature. But I do want to preface anything that I put out there on my channel about modifying your car. You know, I'm not a professional. I'm not a mechanic. You know, honestly, wrenching is not necessarily my forte. I'm really more of the I like the results type of guy. So anything that I put on my channel as far as modifications really would have just worked for me and a lot of the guys that I know. I really just follow their advice and their modification paths as well. So I just wanted to preface that by saying, again, I'm no professional, right? As all infomercials say, results may vary. The biggest piece of advice I could give to you while you're modifying your car is if you run into issues or anything like that, please seek the help of someone who is knowledgeable and things like that in regards to our vehicle. So anyway, without further ado, let's talk about big turbo. Break this down into two different sections. The first section are going to be things that you definitely need, not just for performance, but also for reliability. All right. So, and then as far as your choice in turbo, there's so many options. I won't get into all the different options that are out there. I'll give you a little bit, and I'll certainly talk about the turbo that I'm running, which, as most of you know, is the BNR S4. So let's dive right into it. Mods that you definitely need to purchase, I'd say at the same time that you actually buy your turbo. Number one is going to be a 3.5 bar map sensor. I'm sorry, you don't really need a 3.5. I have a 3.0. And the reason why I say 3.5 is because Corksport makes a sensor that literally replaces the OEM bar map sensor. I think the OEM is like a 2 or a 2.5. And all you're really doing is assisting your ECU and being able to deliver the increased level of boost pressures that are inevitable when you upgrade your turbo. And honestly, that's what you're looking for, you know. There would be no reason to buy a bigger turbo if you're going to keep the same level of PSI as your KO4. So that's going to be number one. JBR has, I think it's called a Bosch 3.0 bar map sensor, and it's great. I mean, most people run that. The only thing is if you buy the one that's offered by JBR, you also have to buy the plug and play harness, because it's not a direct fit where the OEM one goes. But I mean, all in all, you're talking about an extra, I can't remember exactly, I want to say it's like $3 or $5. So that's going to be number one. Number two is a 3-point boost controller. Your OEM boost controller is a 2-port, but again, because we're looking at higher levels of boost pressures far beyond that of a stock setup on the KO4, you definitely have to be able to deliver that boost consistently, number one, and number two, you have to be able to deliver that higher amount of boost on a more reliable basis. So that's going to be number two. Lots of different options here. Cobb's got one, Corksport's got one. I bought mine off of, again, JBR, off the JBR website, and it's super easy. I mean, it literally can directly replace your OEM boost controller. With the bigger turbo, you're also going to need, because it's going to take up more room in your engine bay, and depending on where you've modified up to this point, you're going to also need a T51R battery tray, or a battery box that's made to house smaller batteries with big turbo setups. Again, Corksport's got a really cool looking battery box, which will fit your battery as well as your ECU all in the box. It has a top and everything, so it has a more neat look. It's kind of pricey in my opinion, but I mean, you get what you pay for. The battery trays tend to be a little cheaper, and literally it's just a tray that your smaller battery sits in, and for most battery trays it'll give you a plate where you can mount the ECU on the side. Depending on how large of a turbo you go, that might not even be enough room. A lot of people will mount their ECUs on their fuse boxes, on the top of the fuse box. So it really just all depends on your particular setup, but definitely are going to need something to house that smaller battery and make room for that big turbo and hopefully the bigger intake. Now, depending again on what you purchase initially, most people have a 3-inch intake if you're looking at really creating some power, but I recommend at least the 3-inch or 3.5 or higher. Some of the folks in the community go way higher, and they get into 4.5 inches. So I'd work with your tuner to figure out what would be best for your setup, and then obviously what's going to work best for your power goals. I have a 3.5-inch HTP intake, and I've never really had any issues out of it whatsoever. So you're going to need at least a 3-inch, preferably a 3.5, or even higher. Just talk to your tuner and see what works best for you. So next, because you're looking at possibly increasing timing and things like that, your ignition spark is going to be huge here. Now, contrary to what, depending on your knowledge of cars, most people think that a hotter spark is better, when in all actuality, when you're talking about combustion and things like that, you actually are going to need a colder spark. We recommend going one step colder plugs. Most of the guys that I run with all use the NGK one step colder plugs, and you have to make sure that you have a proper gap. All right. Now there's a tool that you have to use to measure the gap on the plug. So make sure that if you don't know what you're doing, that you get help. Stratified has a really good blog on the proper gap and the advantages and things like that. I'll post a link at the bottom so that you all can see that and use it as a guide when you are gapping your plugs, or in some cases getting help. That's going to be next. One step colder plugs, and I believe the part number, correct me if I'm wrong, it's NGK 6510. The stock circulation system is not made for big power. All right, so one of the things you're going to need is an EGR delete. Okay, lots of people make the delete plates. You make sure that you get either a kit that has a primary and secondary delete plate, or if I don't know of any, but if they have it where it only comes with a primary and secondary, that's great. But don't just buy one or the other, get both. Okay, because all that's doing is recirculating dirty air back into the motor and into the exhaust system. The more clean you can keep your motor and anything that's being recirculated, the better. Again, as I've been stating, I use JBR, and that's just because it's the most common that my friends run. Damon has a good one as well, so take a look at that. Very, very inexpensive modification and very, very easy. There's plenty of videos on YouTube on exactly how to do it. So the next modification, it's arguably necessary, but I highly, highly recommend that you do this with and include it with all of the necessary modifications, and it's an oil catch can. Having more oil and things like that at higher pressures, it can create more soot that in a normal situation be recirculated back into your intake system. Having a catch can filter out some of that the oil that would normally go back into the intake system that's very dirty after it's been through the combustion process already. The catch can's pretty easy to install, of course, because you're dealing with a higher level of pressure. If your state allows it, a vented catch can system, where you basically will buy the venting system separately, is even better. A lot of guys who run just the oil catch can with bigger turbo and higher levels of horsepower can run into an issue where it's under so much pressure that the dipstick pops out and spews oil inside the motor. It did happen to one of my buddies. So I do recommend, if you can, again, go with a vented system, pressure that's that the oil is under while it's recirculating through the intake system. So oil catch can, tons of options, too many to name. Again, I use a JBR kit, and I do have the vented system as well. So whatever your state allows, you know, it's not worth failing an inspection if your state has inspection. So that's going to be next. All right, so the next few modifications I'm going to talk about are optional, okay? And the reason why I bring these up are because these are normally things that you would do anyway over time. But since you're going to have more power, it kind of makes sense to do these things now, again, so that you can protect yourself and protect the vehicle. And the number one thing I want to talk about are brakes. This is probably the one thing that gets neglected with increasing power. If you're going to be going faster, you have to have more stopping ability. So there's not really like a big brake kit outside of the one that Corksport offers, which is close to about $800, and it's just the front two calipers and pads. If you were to do, you know, slotted rotors and upgraded pads, I mean, the brakes in this car are already pretty good. That just makes them that much more better. So I would recommend going upgraded pads and getting slotted rotors. There's a lot of debate on, you know, drilled or slotted rotors, which ones are better. In my research, the slotted ones are actually more functional, while the drilled ones are just kind of cool looking. That's why they're on Porsche and the GTRs and things like that. So I would recommend slotted rotors, upgraded pads, and you're good to go. It might cost you about $400, but it's certainly worth it considering how much more power you'll have before you go big turbo. The next thing I want to talk about is your transmission. So depending on how crazy you're going, you know, you may not have any issues from your clutch for quite some time. Stock clutch is actually pretty good, and I haven't had any slippage or anything like that. Some people go ahead and just do it as soon as they upgrade the turbo, which is smart, but it's not necessarily something that you have to do. Lots of different options out there. It really just depends on what kind of feel and experience you want to have while driving the car. So, you know, whether you want to have 6-puck, full face, things like that, totally up to you. But this will be a time when those sorts of things are going to be even more of an issue, because, you know, if you're going to have 400 horsepower, you know, you are wearing out your transmission a lot quicker because it's under a lot more torque. So certainly look into that as well. All right, so let's talk about intake and exhaust manifolds. Now, the intake manifold at this point is pretty restrictive. So I don't necessarily recommend getting a whole new intake manifold unless you really want to. JMF has a really good one, so does CPE. If you were to port your stock manifold, you're going to have a lot more airflow. I run the OEM manifold that's just ported and painted. So, and it does have a big difference. I mean, obviously you're talking about, you know, a bigger turbo, so more air makes a lot of sense. Now, once you port your manifold, you shave it down and you take off the flappers and things like that that are on the inside, your cold start's going to sound pretty ridiculous. Not something you necessarily have to do, but does help. Okay. Now, as far as exhaust manifolds are concerned, there are a ton of people that keep the stock exhaust manifold. However, I'm running the Access Power version 3, and the biggest thing is just flow. Okay, more air flowing out of that exhaust system, the better, right? Especially since at this point, I'm assuming you already have an upgraded exhaust, so this is just going to be the icing on the cake as far as your exhaust system is concerned. I'd get something else that your tuner can be a huge help with. Okay, not necessary, but certainly these are some of the things that help, and it also makes your engine bay look a lot better. The stock manifold's kind of ugly, and the heat shield over the stock manifold, it does look kind of OEM. So if you want to take your engine bay to the next level, take your performance to the next level. Exhaust manifold is a very, very nice take on that effort. Wastegates. Let's talk about wastegates. I am running a B&R S4, which has an internal wastegate. Okay, so it doesn't give you that same dramatic feel when you're doing a pull, but it gets the job done. And also, it could require that you adjust the amount of preload. Kind of talk to your tuner again, but this is very common when it comes in internal wastegates on big turbos. Not really a huge deal, but the external wastegate is something that is not necessary for the bolt-on turbos, but could be necessary depending on, if you have something that requires a little bit more work, like a board warner or things like that. Now, the B&R can be externally wastegated. It doesn't necessarily have to be. It's really your choice. In my opinion, the tile wastegate is perfect. You don't really need a 44 millimeter. A 38 would be fine. Some guys do run 44, but in my opinion, a 38 millimeter tile wastegate is spot on perfect. So that would be next. Again, not necessary, but certainly does look better, sound cool, and doesn't require adjusting preloads and things like that. It operates on just the spring, so it's pretty awesome. So do your research and kind of go from there. So I said I wasn't going to talk about turbos too much, and we're getting near the end here. So I'll give you a brief summary. So in all actuality, there are a couple of things that you want to look for. There's direct bolt-on turbos. Corksport makes a really good one. I've heard good things about. There are the other direct fits like the B&R S3, S4, things like that. The GTX series, like the 3076, 3071s, all will basically replace the OEM turbo, and in most cases you can keep whatever downpipe you're already running. The B&R S3 and the Corksport turbo are bigger than OEM, but not by a great deal. You're probably gonna max out your S3 or Corksport turbo probably right somewhere between 360 and 400. They're gonna be maxed out, and that's not necessarily a bad thing for most people. I mean, most people, when it comes to speeds, if you're on stock block, 350 horsepower is great, but if you're looking for more power, if you're on a built motor and things like that, those options may not necessarily get you where you're trying to get. Okay, an S4 isn't largely difference in size, but it will be maxed out, I guess, probably around 420, 435 or so, which is pretty good. And then the other thing that you want to look at are whether it's journal or ball bearing. Okay, all of these aftermarket turbos for the most part are rebuildable, so that's not the big issue. But a journal bearing is certainly less of a headache. It's less parts, obviously, but the ball bearing is going to give you a pretty awesome spool. It's kind of like the difference between running a matchbox on carpet as opposed to tile. It's just going to flow better on a ball bearing turbo than it will on a journal bearing. But at the same time, it really just depends on your power goals. In a large number of scenarios, your ball bearing turbos tend to be able to squeeze out more power because you get a better spool that lasts a little bit longer with less effort. So that's the key. Talk to your tuner and get his or her recommendations on your power goals and what turbo is going to have you reach those power goals. That's it. Again, when it comes to big turbos, you're kind of doing this on your own risk. You do have more of a probability of something bad happening because you're modifying the car quite a bit here. So just kind of prepare for that. I definitely appreciate you guys watching the video. I'm loving all the support. I really appreciate it. And again, I'm learning just like most of you are. So if there's anything that I missed, or if you guys have any questions, just feel free to post a comment below. Definitely appreciate it. Like, comment, subscribe. Love you all. Have a good one. Peace.